So what is an emergency fund for, and how much should you have in yours? That's what we're talking about today. Let's get moving forward. Welcome to the Plan Ranger, where our goal is to provide you with informed insights and a reasonable approach to managing your personal finances. Now, in a previous segment, we covered what to happen if what you should do if you find yourself unemployed. And that kind of brought up the question, well, okay, the emergency fund, and shouldn't that be part of that question? And so we thought we'd explore exactly what an emergency fund is and maybe deal with some misconceptions about how you should be looking at your emergency fund and how much you should have in it. So let's kind of start here. What is an emergency fund for? So traditionally, over the last few decades of personal finance, literature, books, thoughts, all that stuff, an emergency fund has been the thing that people think of for, okay, well, what happens if I lose my job? Which is obviously an important consideration here, or, the famous, what happens if my water heater goes down, or I need a car repair or a medical bill or something like that. All of that falls within, for sure, the definition of what you would use an emergency fund for. But where it always became a little trickier was, the conception of, okay, well, I need 3 to 6 months of expenses, but how does that exactly correlate to fixing my car? And what happens if these things happen simultaneously, and things get really bad? And so we're going to kind of dissect that. But one of the things to kind of keep in mind here is that when we talk about an emergency fund, people think I'm saving for something, I need to save. And savings, people tend to look at retirement fund, we're saving for retirement, investing for retirement, and investing and saving for an emergency and these types of things. They tend to look at it the wrong way, at least in my view. When you think about saving for something, yes, you're saving, yes, you're investing. But what you're really doing is you're buying something. You're buying your retirement when you save and invest. And the more you save and invest for retirement, the better a retirement you're purchasing for yourself. And kind of the same thing applies here with an emergency fund. The more you save for it, the more cash you have, or whatever. We'll talk about how to invest that in a second. But generally speaking, cash, the more you have, the more you're buying for yourself. And well, what exactly are you buying when you have an emergency fund? Okay, yes, you're buying security. That's the big one, right? Well, if something goes wrong, I know I'm prepared for it. You're buying security, but that's not even really where this should go. What you're buying is control. You're buying control and dignity for yourself. The idea of having dignity when it comes to your personal finances often never gets discussed. But if you're ready, if you're braced for an impact so that you don't have to go to debt, so that you don't have to go to friends and family, or you don't have to stay in a job that you hate, you have control, you have dignity. And that's kind of what you're buying when we're talking about an emergency fund. You're buying that level of control, and the question is, how much control do you want? My personal philosophy when it comes to this is that you actually shouldn't have just an emergency fund. You should have an emergency fund and a control account. The emergency fund are for things like what happens if I need a car repair, my furnace goes out, things like that. The kind of one-off expenses that you don't really see coming, that catch you off guard, right? But then there's the control account. The control account is making sure that every day when you go into work at your job, that you're doing it because you want to, not because you have to. At least not that job. We all need to earn an income. But where you choose to go to earn that income should be your choice. It should be deliberate that you do that every day at that place, wherever you find yourself. And if you have a good control account, or the stronger that control account is, the more in control of that circumstance you are. You're going to be able to make that choice of, hey, I want to go here. I want to do this today. This is the place I know I want to be. And at the same time, you making that choice is one thing, but also being prepared for if your employer says, hey, you know what? Today's your last day. Here's a box. Take your stuff and go. You're ready for that. It's, while it might still be an emotional and social and psychological impact for you, at least financially, you were ready. You can walk out of there more so with your head held high because you were prepared for it. And that all goes into that part of, again, financial dignity. It's not about peacocking or strutting around or bragging or anything like that. It's just about maintaining your dignity as a person. and your personal finances connects to that. And this is one of those big areas where that connects. You being ready for the unexpected, you taking care of your business. So when we look at kind of these two accounts, your emergency fund and this control account, how much do you need in each one? That's always kind of the next big question. For your emergency fund, the idea that, your water heater could go down, or your furnace or car, medical bill, I think realistically speaking, you want to try and have the greater of either your out of pocket, your out of pocket max for your health insurance. So that might be, 10,000, 12,000, 15,000, something like that set aside, or whatever your largest repair would be for your house, which for most people not covered under a homeowner's policy would be something like your furnace going down, 10, 12, 15,000. So I think for most people, if you had 10 to 15,000 somewhere in just the emergency fund for the unexpected bills that you might incur, you'd probably be fine. Now you need to add to that your control account, which that would be the traditional, let's say 3, 6, 9 months of your expenses. So that if and when you say expenses, we're talking about all of it. We're talking about, your fixed bills and your debts and your groceries and your entertainment, all those types of things. Now, sure, you could always cut back some of those expenses if you needed to, but if you have that 3 to 6 month, expense pot sitting there, you're going to be ready to go in the event that you don't want to go to work anymore. So 3 months to 6 months to 9 months to a year, you'll hear different people talk about different amounts as far as that goes. Realistically speaking, how long would it take you to find another job in what you're doing, earning relatively the same amount of money that you're earning now? Generally speaking, the higher you go in a company or at an income level, the harder or longer it might take you to find another position commensurate with the pay you're earning now. But ultimately, the question is, how long would it take you? And how long do you want to give yourself, and how much control do you want to buy? Is 3 months enough, or is it 6 months? A lot of this comes into play too. Is it a single income household, dual income household? How perilous is the situation for you if something goes wrong? So all of those things kind of come into play, and it's more than anything else just a question of how aggressive or conservative you want to be. The more conservative you are, the more control you want to have, the more months you should have in that control account. I think anything past a year would probably be excessive, probably be unnecessary, but that really is your choice, whatever you think is best to fit your financial needs, right? So let's look at what type of assets you should have inside of these two accounts. Generally speaking, for most people, I would suggest you probably just have cash. Cash is going to be better for you just because you don't have to worry about market swings or volatility affecting it. No, it's not sexy. No, it's not interesting. No, you're not going to probably make any interest. You can use CDs if you want. If once you build this thing out a little bit, you can actually build a CD ladder if you wanted to. Maybe even include a couple bonds. If you're really conservative and you build out a long, a really big control account or a big emergency fund, you could maybe add some really short duration bonds or something like that. But for most people, cash, CDs, those types of things are going to be what you want here, just because you don't want to have to worry about market volatility. Layoffs tend to occur when the economy and the market tanks. These things do tend to sync up a little bit, right? Not always. The market and the economy aren't the same thing. If you're laid off at the same time that the market's getting cratered and your emergency fund or your control account that you spent forever getting in order now also tanked, it's down 30, 40, 50% because you invested it, you don't want to have to sell under those circumstances. So this is going to be cash savings. It's generally recommended among financial professionals that this be held in some conservative asset, something like cash or cash equivalents like CDs, savings accounts, maybe again some really low duration bonds or something like that. But I would probably just say for the moment cash or CDs, just to be safe. While you're building your emergency funding and control account, what should you do? Should you rely on credit cards, your retirement accounts, things like that? Those are, you have to do what you have to do. There are financial realities here. I'm not, frequently when you hear people talk about personal finance, they live in, at least in my view, sometimes a pie-eyed world where everything is always perfect and it's always going great. And, everybody's going to do exactly what they should do. I know that's not the circumstance. I know that chances are if you're watching this and you want to know how much you should have, you might not be in a great position right now. You might be trying to sort all this stuff out. And if that's the case, if you need to use credit cards or debt or something like that, you can. Again, not recommended. There are some other ways you might want to go first, such as using, maybe you want to use some type of secured debt, like against your car or home equity line of credit or something like that, maybe. But rather than pay 20% interest, those might be better ways to go. If you're going to consider your retirement account or your 401k, taking a loan against that at your current employer, let's just say, and this only works if you have the emergency while you're still employed to be able to take a loan against your 401k. Once you leave your employer, you can't take a loan against it. So keep that in mind. This can work for your emergency fund side of things, but not really your control side of things. In other words, where you separate from your employer, you can't take a loan against your 401k anymore. But from the emergency side of things, you could technically look to your 401k to help you in a bind for something like a water heater or whatever, take a small loan. Just keep in mind that, again, if you're going to hold your 401k in that light, that you might use it as an emergency fund, you probably do not want to have it invested extremely aggressively, or you want to have at least that portion of it, say 5, 10, 15,000, in a more conservative investment like cash. Because again, you don't want to have to sell assets. You want to be able to sell investments on your terms, not because you're in a dire circumstance where you'll sell at a discount, and take a bad hit on it. So you, generally speaking, want to try and keep that stuff a little more conservative inside of there. But again, that's not recommended. The right way to approach this is probably to say, okay, if you have an employer-sponsored retirement plan where you're getting a match, you want to make sure you're getting that match. But then every other dollar that you're saving outside of this should be heading into either your emergency fund first and or your control account, either or of these, right? And you can, while you're getting started, you can use these things interchangeably, obviously. I mean, it's just that the goal should be ultimately, once you've filled one bucket, then you start really working on the other one, or whether you view it as one bucket and the calculation is just, okay, 10 or 15,000 for my emergency fund plus 3 to 6 months to 12 months or whatever that is for my control account added together. That should be your focus. Aside from getting the match from your employer, don't leave free money on the table, but start hammering away at that. And I know it's not an exciting thing to save for, but remember, you're not saving the money, you're buying it. You're buying that control, you're buying that dignity, you're buying that security. So look at it that way. So you want to start buying that as soon as possible and as quickly as you can. And the quickest way to do that is to kind of set a goal for yourself, a push start, right? So you've set this target. I want to hit $30,000 in this account, right? 10 to 15,000 for my emergencies, another 15, 20,000 for my control so that I choose when and where I go to work. That number, let's say, is 30,000. Set yourself a hardcore goal for that first, let's say, a quarter. You want to get to 20%, or let's say $6,000 in the next 3 months. And so you cut back on some expenses. You kind of focus on really hard on how you can buy that control account, how you can buy that security, and that dignity, and you just go at it really hard. Set that quick start for yourself, because honestly, that's always the hardest part, is getting started. Now, one last thing I'll mention here. People always wonder, should I set up my emergency fund, but hey, I've got credit card debt or this, student loans, whatever over here. You need to have some type of cash cushion in there. I would recommend probably trying to set up at least 2 months of expenses before you start paying down, really start hammering away at your debt. You want to be able to control your circumstances, I think, from employment as much as possible, and be braced for an emergency. And I think at least if there's a 2-month buffer there of your expenses, then you start paying down debts and things like that. And then you can circle back to, the emergency fund. That's probably the way to go. So hopefully, if you're dealing with credit card debt or anything else like that, and this would really only apply to high interest credit card debt, your auto loans, things like that, I would just say keep paying those while you build up this emergency fund and control account. You want to keep paying those. But if it's credit card debt, that's a little bit different. Build that 2-month cash cushion there for yourself, and then start hammering away at those credit cards. And we'll talk about how to pay down debt in another course, but right now we just want to really focus on the emergency fund and control account, and hopefully helping to reshape your perspective on how to use those and how to look at those. That you're buying yourself security, you're buying yourself control, you're buying yourself your own personal financial dignity. So hopefully that helps. If you have any questions or any thoughts, comments, I'd love to know how much how many months you keep in your emergency fund, your control account. Please feel free to leave your questions, thoughts, and answers down in the comments below. And if you'd like to, please click the subscribe button to join the Plan Ranger community. We'd love to have you. And until next time, thanks for taking the time. We hope this helped.